In US dollars, this is how much Nasha made at the box office after its 2019 release. Most of that international gross coming from its native China alone, setting some box office records. Now let's see the gross of Nasha 2 from earlier this year. Once again, most of that international gross is from its native China, making almost 3 times the amount the first film did, and breaking and setting more box office records, including now becoming the 5th highest grossing film of all time. They are not messing around. What is up, everybody? Random Random Man here, bringing you my review for Nasha 2 in one take. Now, where do I begin in talking about this movie? As I just broke down a little bit with my intro earlier, in that this movie is a literal big deal. I remember seeing all the coverage, or at least a bunch of articles and spotlighting for this movie earlier this year, given that, of course, I love and follow all things movie related, and saw how this film was quickly becoming one of the most successful films of all time. As I mentioned, it is now the 5th highest grossing movie of all time, only behind both Avatar movies, Avengers Endgame and Titanic. And the other records that it broke and set include the likes of it now being the highest grossing non-English language film of all time and the highest grossing animated film of all time. So seeing all that, you would think that here in the United States, the movie would get a bigger release at some point to have anyone interested see what all the hype is about. And this has now returned to US theaters after an initial limited run with the original Mandarin Chinese language being used for its audio, but now it has received an English dub courtesy of A24 distributing it, and it came to my local theater, and that is how I was able to go ahead and see this thing. And to give some backstory too, also some context for all this, this is called Nasha 2. So it is a direct sequel to 2019's Nasha, as I also made clear with my intro, and I have actually seen and reviewed that film, but not on this YouTube channel. I saw and reviewed this film for my work's YouTube channel. So for those that don't know, I work at a library, and 5 years ago was when I did this, and that was back in the earlier part of the pandemic. And I did so in me choosing this movie to see and review from home because it was streaming on Hoopla, which is a platform that you can create a free account for and connect your library card with, so that you can basically check out and watch stuff and access other materials like you would an in-person library, but it's all digital. And I will leave a link for my review of that film in the description if you're curious to see my fuller details on it. But to give just the basic gist of it, so to give you details also as to what Nasha is even about. So Nasha is based on an ancient mythological character in Chinese history, to where he is born from a heavenly pearl. There are 2 halves to this pearl. One of them is a demon half and the other is a spirit half. The demon half is what Nasha is born from, and he is destined to bring destruction wherever he goes. So he must choose between the good path or the bad path. And then the character that is born from the other half, the spirit half, is someone named Ao Bing, with whom he has, a contentious relationship with, a friendship of sorts, frenemies, whatever. And then by the end, it sets up the events of the second film, to where a sacrifice is made, and now as the second movie begins, it shows them having basically no bodies. And this is where I talk about the setup of the second film too, to where only Nasha's body is able to be recreated in human form, and Ao Bing is within him as well. And by the end of the first movie too, there's a whole war that's brewing, and Nasha and Ao Bing are basically given a week to complete 3 trials so that they are able to go ahead and restore whatever has been destroyed from before, and a bunch of other stuff that goes in between too. There's a lot, clearly, as I'm mentioning right now, with how these two movies go narratively. And with the first film, at least, I did enjoy it. There's a lot of context and backstory as to how these characters are set up and everything. The characters themselves are based on ancient Chinese mythology, but the story itself is original as far as I know. But the big highlight of Ne Zha is the animation, because it goes toe-to-toe with a lot of Hollywood films and the kind of animation films that are produced by them, and just how it is in scale, all the colors, how it's all rendered and such. I mean, I enjoyed the film on that level alone. Story-wise, it got to be a bit much at times, just like I mentioned with how the first film going into the second film has a lot of narrative threads and like connections with it. So now with the setup of the second film, with this war really on the rise, and the two main characters are basically tasked with just going around and completing trials, also so that they become immortal and also just prevent all other destruction from happening. Yeah, there's a lot here, and clearly with this film, Ne Zha 2, having just been the biggest hit in China's history and one of the biggest hits of film history in general. Yeah, again, that is why I had to go see this, on top of me having enjoyed the first film from what I recall. And with the voice cast, there is one notable name that is leading it in terms of being a part of this film. And that is Michelle Yeoh, who is the voice of Ne Zha's mom, who is a big character in the first film and also comes back here. Ne Zha's parents were a clear big part of this because Ne Zha was born from this demon orb while his mom was pregnant, and then all this other stuff that happens in between. And, you know, Michelle Yeoh, who doesn't love Michelle Yeoh? She's great here. When I saw the first film, all those years ago by now, I saw it in the original Mandarin Chinese language, so I don't know how the English dub for the first film is compared to the second film that I saw here in theaters in English, but most of the voice acting I thought here was more than sufficient. With Yo, I love, of course, and then the voice of Ne Zha himself is from Crystal Lee, and I thought Lee did well expressing all the angst and the conflict that Ne Zha has after what he has gone through in the first film, and then now being tasked while also having the spirit of Ao Bing in him to go ahead and try to prevent all other chaos from happening later on in the narrative, which it gets quite expansive, as I'll mention here soon. And there's a lot more characters. There's characters that do return from the first film, like the master of Ne Zha, who is this heavy, clumsy, bumbling kind of dude, bringing a lot of the comic relief here. Ne Zha's parents, as I've mentioned, and so many more characters that are brought in here. And going into how there are so many plot threads going on in the background and in connection to the main plot, a lot is going on here. For the first hour or so, I would say, the movie gets us reacquainted with these characters. The intro of this film has this painting or like 2D animated sequence to where it gives us a really basic gist as to what happened in the first film leading up to the second film, which I needed because, again, it's been 5 years since I've last seen the first film, just to be like, oh yeah, that's right, a sacrifice was made and the bodies of Ne Zha and Ao Bing were destroyed, and now this is where we begin the second film. And then again, we are introduced to a lot more characters besides the ones that are coming back from the first one. And then the movie, after we get the plot or see the plot get up and running, Ne Zha and Ao Bing have to complete these trials, yada yada yada, the movie takes a turn. It takes quite a significant shift from being something that, you know, had some elements of darkness or serious drama with it, to just being full on deadlocked and, like, you know, really serious, to where a lot more stakes are being defined and expressed. And I'm like, whoa, because like the first film, there are elements of slapstick or goofy comedy here, you know, toilet humor, fart jokes, all that. I mean, this is clearly a movie meant for families and kids as well, on top of it being based on characters that are really popular in ancient Chinese mythology. But then the movie just suddenly grows. It suddenly expands and becomes epic in scale. And that did catch me off guard at first seeing that, because it's a departure from the first film. And of course, given that it's the sequel, it's supposed to be bigger and a lot more kind of brewing and giving a lot more for the characters to handle. And with that, it's a similar thing that I had while watching the first film, to where sometimes it was a bit much to follow a bunch of these characters. There's multiple people here, and there's storylines and relationships that go on that are given to see like where they are at a certain point. Again, the relationship between Nasha and Ao Bing is contentious, despite them being allies and like trying to figure out and like solve everything, also while fighting and all these battles that they're going through. There's a lot here. And then when that shift happens, we're getting into the second half of the movie, where it just becomes this, it becomes this just all-out war, basically. As I've mentioned, that was already being set up by the end of the first film, going into now the second. It's a lot to sometimes handle. At times, I thought it was teetering in becoming something that was not confusing, but not exactly having a coherent flow as to how I was seeing everything, because it pings back and forth between a bunch of characters on top of the main through line of what Nesha and Ao Bing have to do, and the fate of this world that's going on here, and all of that. But rooting all of this together is the animation. And with how much time has passed since the first film going into now the second one, this is unbelievable. And I say that in the best way. This is an animation achievement. It really goes toe-to-toe, and even sometimes rivals and exceeds a lot of Hollywood films that I've seen that are within the medium of animation. It's insane to see what happens by the end of this movie. I mean, the third act of this film, the final battle sequence, this final just chunk of the movie, takes up, I don't know, I want to say more than a half hour or so, and it becomes on the level of something like Avengers Endgame crossed with Dragon Ball Z. That is the best way I can describe it. And I think on that front alone, it's worth seeing this movie, especially in theaters. Seeing this thing in theaters on the big screen is something to behold, with how everything comes together by the end. Even if you're not necessarily following everything 100% with the narrative, it's just it's something that has to be seen to be believed, and just what the medium of animation is able to show with its potential, and again, for the creativity that is put all together. And the same writer and director from the first film comes back here. I'm blanking on his name. I'll throw it up here on the screen. But what an impressive job that he did again here. I believe, if I remember correctly, the first film was the first film he ever did. So he's not necessarily the most experienced animation director or filmmaker ever. But wow, just a huge step up from the first film here in terms of scale, and just going into more of the story too. Even with the story, confounding me at some moments and places, to where I'm like, okay, I'm trying to follow who's this person again, and like, how they're connected to this person, going back and forth, all that. I was still engaged to see that, there's a lot at stake here, and, the relationship that Nesha has with his parents, especially his mom, and that's a smart choice as to why Michelle Yeoh was the voice of her in the English dub, just to get us to identify with her and them, and then all this other stuff that we see in between, like all these different locations that we go to. At one point, so like when that switch happens, we see like this giant, like, cauldron or whatever it is just come up from the ground and be one point of the location for the film, and just part of how the film is just going on and like preparing us for what we see in the epic finale. And just, wow, the movie left me stunned and left me speechless in many moments here. And when it all comes together, I do think the movie is still something that is noteworthy on top of the historical value that it has now brought in modern movie history, but also just seeing how, like, international films, like, they are getting a lot more exposure, and they're getting a lot more seen by at least audiences that live here in the US. An American viewer like myself, earlier this year, I'm Still Here from Brazil, made waves and became the winner of the Best International Feature Film Oscar, deservingly so. I love that movie, and my review for that film got quite a bit of attention here for someone who runs a smaller YouTube channel like this one, so that was cool to see. And animation lately, I mean, this year, I mentioned in my previous review when I finally saw and reviewed K-pop Demon Hunters that this year for animation hasn't been too noteworthy in my opinion. I mean, I saw and loved K-pop Demon Hunters like most of the world over, and then now with Neosha 2, this being the second animated movie in a row that I have now seen and reviewed, I see a lot of the same attributes here. And with that, I also see a lot of the same attributes from what I was big on and not so big on with the first film from what I remember. And mostly, like I said, it has to do with like the narrative having so many characters and so many things to balance out with the narrative, and just trying to follow everything at once. You're not going to probably catch everything or remember everything all together at first. And with the second film, it also being longer than the first, that is what I have to point out too. It is about a half hour longer than the first Neosha film, running at just under 2.5 hours. And when that shift happened to where it was getting more serious and getting a lot more epic in scale, I was feeling that running time because of more of the plot coming in and just seeing a lot of other things coming to a head. There is a mid-credit scene with this film, and the movie even makes it clear that, this mid-credit scene you're gonna stay for, and it's gonna set up a sequel. It leaves some things open, and it goes on for minutes. I mean, part of it's for the comedy, just like it was shown off earlier in the film, but also to set up what is gonna happen with a third film. And of course, a third film is gonna happen, I imagine, now with this film becoming the biggest animated movie in history and just one of the biggest movies of all time. Like, I would think that work is being done on it right now, and hopefully it'll see a bigger release around the world, not just here in the United States, away from its native China. So yeah, but with all of that, just seeing what I would make of Neosha 2 overall, I would say that, like the first film, from what I recall, I enjoyed it. And really, it's the animation alone, like with the first film, that makes these films worth seeing. And now that it's got a release here in theaters here in the US, I mean, that is something to go ahead and bask in the glory of, especially if you are so into animation, and to see what a country outside of here offers in terms of films, because of course movies are made the world over. And that is, that's the basic gist as to what I would say I thought of Neosha 2. I mean, my thoughts are pretty scrambled and discombobulated, as you can tell, because the movie was quite a lot. Just trying to have myself make of this movie what I would, after seeing it earlier this morning. But yeah, so all in all, I did enjoy Neosha 2. I do recommend it, and it's getting windy and the sun keeps coming and going, so I should probably wrap up my thoughts here for the film and give my final verdict. My final verdict for Neosha 2 is 3.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Neosha 2. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.